Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the much anticipated and long awaited film debut and artist talk with Nicole Fall. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this so the content can be accessed on demand for those who couldn't join us this evening. Closed captioning can be enabled as long as one person will request it from us, and then we can get it started. So if one person could request it, I will enable it. And then you can turn on the auto-generated captions by clicking where you see the two C's in the box and the words live transcript below it, and then choosing shows transcript. And that same drop-down menu will give you access to the settings menu for sizing, so you can do it so that you can see it. Do keep in mind that that is auto-generated from Zoom, so it's not perfect. But it's the best we can do at the moment. Please share your questions that you have for Nicole in the chat, and we'll have Nicole answer them as many as we have time for. We will try to wrap up on or close to 8 p.m. So welcome again. This marks the first installment of what we envision becoming a continuing Artist Spotlight series, using the medium of film vignettes to share the stories of those who are the life force of Baltimore Clayworks community, our artists. My name is Tracy Pullo, Executive Director of Baltimore Clayworks. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the mission of Baltimore Clayworks is to develop, sustain, and promote an artist-centered community that provides outstanding educational, artistic, and collaborative programs in the ceramic arts. By employing an anti-racist and anti-ableist framework, Baltimore Clayworks affirms the gifts of all artists to harness the power of clay. We acknowledge the systemic inequity that exists in the nonprofit arts world that we inhabit. Baltimore Clayworks opposes injustice that limits access of BIPOC, individuals with disabilities, and all creatives who are underrepresented and devalued in the world of art. Joining us tonight is our featured artist, Nicole Fall. Nicole is a talented artist, educator, and administrator, and an exceptionally wonderful person. It's quite ironic that she has accepted our request to be the focus of this first spotlight, because as we were planning the final activities before her retirement from the Baltimore Clayworks staff, she forbade me from planning anything that would draw any additional attention to her. But we're so lucky that she did, and it is so deserved. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Elizabeth Whitner, whose passion and persistence guided this project from concept to completion. Elizabeth connected us with the amazing filmmaker Joe Rubino, and we are grateful to be the recipients of his talent. Before we debut this short film, it's almost 6 minutes in length, I'd like to share some background about Nicole. And then you'll know why she was clearly a clear runner for the spotlight. Nicole Fall was born and raised in Washington, D.C. in the turbulent 60s and 70s, a time of fervent protest that she attended over the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, and women's rights. Her family's history as Ukrainian and French Jews, victims of the Holocaust, stories of resistance, and as well as her father's death from a landmine in the Vietnam War, mixed with current events, creates for Nicole a view of the world that is in constant turmoil. This tumultuous feeling plays out in Nicole's sculptural works in clay, welded steel, and cast bronze. She employs imagery found from observation of nature to explore the human condition, often manifesting in strong visual movement and high intensity color. Her mission as an artist educator is to empower people through engagement in the arts and to work towards a full equity and inclusion in the arts. Nicole holds a BFA from MICA and an MFA from Towson University. She's been the interim executive director for Baltimore Claywork during 2 times of transition in 2017 and 2020. She was community arts program manager from 2000 to 2003, where she helped establish a satellite site at Mondawmin Mall, and a public art mural in partnership with the St. Francis Academy and artist Leroy Johnson. She returned as community arts program manager from 2019 to 2021, where she managed the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund grant that funded the Baltimore Clayworks Workforce Development Program, a partnership with Baltimore City Public Schools Transition Connections Program for students with intellectual disabilities. Several mosaic tile murals were made in partnership with the community, led by artists Herb Massey, Salah Jenkins, Iselina Minjong Alva, and Jubilee Arts Youth in Business students. The mosaics were made with the following partners: Park Heights Renaissance, Wombwork, Sankofa Children's Museum of African Cultures, Great Blacks in Wax, and Access Art. Nicole has also had a long teaching career, including as a founding teacher at the Carver Center for Arts and Technology, an associate professor at Baltimore City Community College, and as an adjunct professor at various local colleges, including MICA. She has received grants from the Maryland State Arts Council and the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, among others. She's participated in over 100 group shows, including Makerere, University in Kampala, Uganda in 2011, and Hanoi College of Fine Art in Vietnam in 2000. Nicole works with communities to create public art, including Brooklyn O'Malley Boys and Girls Club, funded by the Gutierrez Memorial Fund, and Washington Very Special Arts, School for the Arts in Learning, among others. Nicole has lived in France and Cambodia, and currently lives in Sparks, Maryland, working in the spacious studio that you will see in this film. So we will go ahead and debut the film, and then we will hear from the artist herself. Okay, wow. We're so excited to have that. So, as we all know, art is essential to nourishing, sustaining, and healing the human spirit as we process our life experiences. Nicole, you mentioned in the film that you have to make art as a way of understanding and making sense of the world. Do you remember what first inspired you to make art, and what inspires your work now?
Thank you. Before we start, someone had asked for closed captioning. Can we please put that on? Thank you. Well, so I have to say that my first inspiration, of course, was my mother, Dorothy Fall, who's an artist, and she's with us today. She has the Aurora Borealis behind her. So she's an artist. She took me everywhere, to museums, galleries. She was involved in the DC. She is involved in the DC art scene. And she has always encouraged me. And so she was my first influence. And then I started taking art classes, and at MICA, there was a really strong ceramic program, and Doug Baldwin and Lois Hennessy taught there. And they were both very influential. So Doug's work had a comic sense to it. Everybody would agree. And then Lois's work has a kind of a narrative, a visual narrative that goes on. And so both of those really influenced my ceramic work, as well as Doug saying, if you have an idea, you can figure it out. And so they were always very encouraging that way. Oops.
And what inspires your work now?
Oh, I mean, I'm still, I still look to nature, observing nature, drawing from nature. And also, of course, I'm always visiting museums and galleries as well.
Great. And so you've mentioned a few of your influences. Can you name a few other of your influences in your early career?
Sure. So the ceramic artist Robert Arneson, I have to refer to a list here. Robert Arneson, again, he used humor, and he used figurative work to make satirical statements. And then, surprisingly, painters like Alice Neal and her very intensive portraiture, Robert Colescott, African-American painter who also had a satirical bent to his work, a very biting satire about race. And then Eva Hesse, a minimalist sculptor, who really, she was working primarily in the 60s and 70s and really broke ground for women, unfortunately, probably posthumously more than when she was living. She died young. Nancy Graves and Louise Bourgeois, certainly. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to also, before I go on, I just want to remind everyone that they can add their questions into the chat, and we can add them in as we can intersperse them as we go. Let's see. Can you talk a little bit about your creative process and how your practice has changed over time?
So when I first started out, I was a very shy and kind of withdrawn person. And so I felt that the way I could really be seen was through my work. And the process was simply like it is now pretty much, is to start with the material and see where it leads me. And I won't even have a general idea sometimes. I'll just start working. And I preface it by looking at imagery in nature, but I'm always thinking, I'm very involved in keeping up with the socioeconomic situation, the political situation, things like that. So that stuff is always stirring around in my head. And so, there is this whole thing about the human condition. I'm really talking about that when I'm doing the work. So I just start working. And then at some point, I have to make more and more decisions. And so then it becomes clearer, the path becomes clearer. And so that's how that goes. I hit a point, which I'm sure every artist does, and when you're doing your major work that you spent a lot of time on, you hit a point where you think you can't go on, or you can't figure it out, or it's not working. Why do I do this? Why am I an artist? And then you get over that hump. And then I feel like then the energy comes again to take it to the end.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have to be patient during those times and give it, and step away, and then you sort of percolate on it for a while and then figure out what the next steps are?
Well, what tends to happen, which isn't the way I work now, but what tended to happen was that's why I would work on several things at once. So when something wasn't working, I would just go on to the next thing. And sometimes what happened in the next thing, and I'd be working on 3 pieces at once or something, and sometimes it would give me an answer about this other thing that I had gotten stuck on. The way I work now, so I've had this lifetime of being in the classroom and interacting with students every day, all day. And also being involved in community right from the get-go. When I graduated from college, I was teaching senior citizens in different senior centers all over Baltimore. And so I feel like and also just working in community arts too, this collaborative thing that goes on, this communication that goes on, the relationship building that goes on really has affected my work. It's like I prefer working more collaboratively. I haven't gotten used to getting back in the studio and just being by myself. It's something like I almost don't understand it. And I think teachers do get into really getting involved in their students' creative process. And it's actually fed my creative process too, made me think about things, and my having to articulate ideas and help them with their work and guide them has really fed my process too.
Absolutely, gives you clarity as well. You mentioned in the film that many of your works are surreal, and they're not literal, and they're open for very much interpretation. Have you ever been surprised by some of the responses and the interpretations from people who view your work?
Well, I haven't been surprised. The thing I've been surprised about is that they interpreted the way I meant it to be. I'm open to anything anyone wants to say, but nobody has ever said to me, "Oh, those are really pretty flowers." Like, no one has said that. So, I think people are getting
The message is
the feeling that I'm putting out there. So.
That's great. That's great. So, you said that it was like, you have a drive to create when you don't, so what do you do when you don't have access? How do you channel that drive to create when you're away from clay or steel, or, what do you do as a creative outlet?
Well, if I'm not producing, sometimes it's because I'm in the classroom. So, so teaching is a very creative pursuit, and there are teachers on this talk, they can weigh in. It's a very creative pursuit. And so when I'm not working, that's generally where I am. And if I don't have access to materials, I always find something to work with. So, if let's say I'm in a foreign country and I don't have access to materials, I go to the store and buy thread and fabric and start embroidering or something. There's always something there. Or it becomes a time to collect information, meaning looking at artwork, looking at the environment, that kind of thing.
Great, great. So this being Women's History Month, I wanted to ask a couple questions in that vein. What is it like to be a female sculptor in a male-dominated medium?
Well, that's changed quite a bit. I think it used to be a male-dominated medium, and now it's quite not. I mean, I think it's pretty equitable. I mean, in terms of the people the genders who are working in it. But it was difficult coming up, and I remember being in graduate school, and this wouldn't happen now at this graduate school because they have a much more diverse faculty, of feeling like I had to fight for everything I wanted. They did accept that I did have support for what I was doing, but I had to really push, and there would be these assumptions made, and I felt like it was a real fight. But I also, so and now it seems, I think Micah, 70% of their students are female.
Yeah.
Or non-binary. So it's changing a lot.
Yes, that's good. Have you encountered any other barriers to becoming an artist?
I expected barriers.
Okay.
So I almost don't even see it that way. It's like the nature of the beast. It's the nature of what you're doing. Are you going to get into this show? Will you get gallery representation? I really stepped away from that. I found that it was hurtful more than it was helpful. And I've reevaluated that whole thing. I don't want to be that competitive. But yes, there were barriers, but it wasn't anything I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, you sort of knew what you were getting into.
Right.
All right. So another one on the Women's History Month front. How do you make a holistic life balancing career and family?
It's not easy. And I'm sure many of us on here have done that. When my husband and I first started out, we had a child when we were in our mid-20s, and I was working in a restaurant, and he was working at New Arts Foundry, which casts sculpture for artists. And so I would work nights and he would work days. And it is very difficult to find studio time. You have to really, and that was the thing, you work around your child's schedule. You always find something in there somewhere. And I would pay my next door neighbor $2 an hour so I could, get a couple hours in the studio or something, because I didn't have that much money. And so, and again, it was something I was expecting. It wasn't like, wait a minute, why is this happening? Now I can't do my work. It was never like that. It was like, I'm going to have a life. I'm going to have kids. We're going to make this work. But I did feel like it was difficult at that point in the 80s. There was this kind of thing where I think some artists looked at you as not serious if you had children. And that's less so now, it seems to me.
Yeah, that's such a shame that you know, that people think that there had to be that sacrifice, or so let's see. Do we have any questions in the chat just yet? No? Okay, I'll keep an eye on that. I'm gonna switch over to focus on a little bit on your teaching. You've taught students of all ages and levels. How did you come to focus on equity and the empowerment of students in your teaching career?
That's always been my focus without consciously realizing it. I mean, I wasn't a great student as a kid, and I felt like no matter what, I was going to make kids feel like, or anyone I was teaching, take them from where they are to the next level. And so that's always been my focus. And
yes, meeting them where they are is so important.
Right. And the thing too, even in like an arts high school, I wanted to have everyone move up to where they were doing their best work. And so that was always my focus.
Absolutely. Yes. So in the film, you mentioned, your work in responding to the clay and reacting to the steel and the factors that bring a work where you hadn't planned or imagined it would go. And I witnessed this flexibility in your community arts work as well, as you were customizing programming for a myriad of partner organizations, each of which had their own unique needs and goals and resources. So they were all moving targets, if you will.
Right.
And I think you have mentioned this a little bit, maybe you could go into it a tiny bit more. Has working in the community arts program influenced your artwork? Or how has it influenced your artwork? You mentioned that you derived, your creative juices from working in the community.
I love hearing people's stories. And so when you're working with a community, whenever we've been working with a community, to go to a place and listen to like the manager of the rec center, what they say about their student body, what they say about how their place is run, all that stuff, people's stories really intrigue me. And then the collaboration with the artist, and since I was really an administrator a lot of the time, just making everything run, but also dealing with, every place runs a little bit differently or a lot differently. And so, and this is true with teaching too. Like if you're going to individualize instruction, meaning help each student reach the goal, then you've got to have some flexibility. And so it's, and I kind of love that. I mean, it's like, that's not a problem for me. That's how I understand how to work.
Right,
I don't know if I answered the question.
Very good career choice was the community arts, given your flexibility. So it was nice to see that in your artwork as well. What role can art take in community engagement?
When you're in community, it gives people an opportunity to get away from their whatever everyday problems they have. This is on the a really little level. But for instance, we were working at House of Ruth, a shelter for battered women and children, and men too, actually. And so we were doing a class for children, but the mothers would be there too, and sometimes the fathers, and they'd all be sitting there working. And I really felt like we were giving them this kind of relief from, they were housed there. So it was, I'm sure they have a lot of things to think about, but for that hour and a half, they could just do that. I think it also, so you turn in on yourself, even if you're making an artwork where you're making an object like a flower or something, you are really communicating with yourself. And you're really thinking about your life, not consciously, but it's kind of like manipulating this material and thinking about it is giving you a different perspective. And I'd like to say, there's an example of that. We were working at Man Alive for people in recovery from addiction. And at the end of the course, this woman said, you know, I came every week and it made me realize if I can come every week to class, I can probably hold down a job. And I was stunned. I was like, yes, this is what this is about. You know, it empowers you for the rest, for other aspects of your life, you know.
Yes, life skills for sure. Let's see. I see we have a couple of questions. Great in the chat. We're going to get to those in one quick moment. You've witnessed the transformative power of art. Which community projects or partnerships do you feel had the deepest impact? Now, you shared two of them with us already just in the last question, but maybe do you want to share your photos now for some of the things you did in community arts, or answer the question and then let me know when you want to share screen?
I mean, we could show the one project with CASA.
Okay.
So I'll share the screen with that.
Okay. Hold on one second.
I've got it, I think.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, so there's just this one project. We were working with CASA of Maryland, which works with immigrants from all countries. And we brought artist George Rodriguez, who's in the back there with the yellow insignia on his t-shirt and the peace signs. And he's from Texas originally. He's Mexican American, and he's been living in Seattle, and now he's teaching at Tyler School of Art. And so we were working with the community, and CASA is so well run that we were able to do 8 full workshops over 8 weeks, and we had so many attendees, and it was really nice. Here you can see some of the people working. And there's George, and he was teaching them how he works. All right, now I'm not sure if our images are getting in the way of seeing all of this, but you can see there's supposed to be 3 models there. You see, and those were the 3 models that George made. And then I'll show you the one that he finally, and so the community voted on which one they wanted, and he made the sculpture for them. So this piece is about 5 feet tall. It's made completely out of clay, and we're getting ready to install it down at CASA near Patterson Park. And as usual with a lot of these projects, and I'll stop sharing screen, with a lot of these projects, you have to get involved with the city and getting permission to install work outdoors. So so we're waiting. We're waiting with anticipation for the city to do their part, moving a trash can, so we can set it up. And then again, that's where relationships are very important. You can't just do something like, yes, I have a tool, I could go down there and we could take that trash can out, but then you ruin the relationships that you're trying to build just with a small, insensitive response. So I think we have some questions.
Project. Yes, so I'll read some questions. Cheryl Edwards asks, what if any experiences during your childhood has influenced your artwork? And if yes, how does it show up in your current artwork? And I guess, and she says she's speaking about memories.
I think memories affect you, and they stay with you, especially as a child, and then you carry that with you, and it's not necessarily conscious. It affects how you respond to the world around you. I feel like my work does have a certain grotesqueness to it. It has a certain bitter humor to it that will always run through the work.
So Gigi asked, I'll skip down to Gigi's because she says, Nicole, you said your work has an element of the grotesque. Please explain why. Thanks.
Okay. I mean, I might be using the wrong word, but you know, there's an excessiveness to it. In some of the pieces look like they could come out and grab you. And it really deals with that feeling of the horror of seeing people hurt. they're starting to do this again, but the Vietnam War was always on your TV. And then my father died in Vietnam, but he would take me to visit a family friend who had driven over a landmine and survived. And we would go and see him, and he was in complete traction from broken legs. And it ended up he had a broken neck, but they didn't discover it until later. And we would go visit him. And I was 7 or 8 years old. So I could see what the effects of this was, the war, any war. I was really hoping that we would never have to deal with that again. I would think that people had learned their lesson. You know, you could think that about World War II if you were a child when that happened. And so that kind of thing, what it means, that grotesqueness means that, you know, you're going along having a natural, you know, like everything's fine. It's not fine. Everything is not fine. And we know that now. We've had COVID, and now we're dealing, you know, now we have some feeling about the Ukraine and what's going on there. You know, and also we could just look at home, right? With our issues with race and violence. Those are with us, and it influences everything. So, so when you're seeing this grotesqueness, there's a certain kind of goofiness or humor, but it's not funny and it's not benign. And I think comedians and satire, political satire, any kind of satire helps you to take a look at things that are very difficult to think about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe you could share, yes, I mean, it must bring up lots of memories from your childhood, you know, and from your past and your family's history to see it unfold again. So when you said that, you know, you're viewing the world as a tumultuous place, well, there's been, you know, certainly lots of tumult to be trying to grapple with for all of us. So maybe you could show us a few. You could share with us what you're working on currently, and then I can ask this next question
Okay.
from Stephanie after we see a little bit of like your current work.
All right. So really, these are just things that are in progress, things I'm kind of fooling around with. I made a bunch of these starfish that's what I'm calling them, but I don't know what they will be in the end. The bottom parts are made of metal, welded steel, and then the rest of this is all clay.
Well, could you make that full screen, Nicole?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you.
There we go.
Hopefully you can see that better. Yeah, and there's high intensity color there. Of course, as an artist, you kind of see things you want to change. And here are detail shots. And I like this. So color. Someone was asking in the chat about color. Again, what I do is I start with a color, because again, I haven't planned how I'm going to color something. So I start with a color. Sometimes I'm priming it with a lighter color like yellow was used here. And then I went back into it with greens. And then what happens is I want to use a complementary color. I want to do, and when you use complementary colors that are opposite each other, for anyone who's not an artist, on the color wheel, it creates a jarring effect, not a bad jarring effect, you know, it can, and so what happened here is I wanted to add warmer colors to kind of act in opposition to the greens and blues. So that's kind of what happens. Again, I start with a color, I build up, and then it becomes clearer where I'm going to go with the color. And
so you start only thinking of the initial color, and then the rest comes to you, because yeah, are you thinking about
well
color?
it's all an experiment. I mean, it's not like I'm not making a decision. I am making decisions. So what I put in a color, then I'll put on another color, and then I keep going until my head kind of catches on to something, and then I have a direction.
Great.
So
great.
I'm making a bunch of these pods out of porcelain, and I make the metal vines for them. The metal vines hang from the ceiling or from anyway, there's something that I use to have them hold in the wall. And so and this is about 15 inches, and I'm doing a number of them, kind of questioning why I'm doing them now. I'm kind of questioning that. Can't give you a real answer, except I like the blooming effect, but it's also, again, is it a virus? Is it something that's going to grow out of control? You know, there's always that kind of tension there. These are clay pieces that they're actually bisqued now, so they've been through one firing. Here they are as greenware. They're about almost 3 feet tall, and I am going to start building up on them. Again, I've just done some sketches, but I don't ever follow the sketches, but it just gives me a direction. And I will add metal. I'm just not clear yet how that'll happen. I was inspired by Cy Twombly up here on the upper left, and he's known for his drawings, which you'll see here next to them. And I have an issue with drawing. I haven't ever really developed a direction or a way of drawing. And so I was inspired by seeing his work at Glenstone Museum. And then, so here I took some objects and I drew on them and glued them together. And here you have a silver, this is also, I consider it a drawing on the left here. It's a shell, and then it's on this, I've attached it to the silver platter. I have a bunch of old silver stuff like this. I don't remember where I got it. I'm always collecting stuff. And so if you're thinking about any connection to colonialism or the master in our time, then you wouldn't be wrong. I'm aware of the kinds of connections I'm making. I'm not necessarily intending them. I'm not going, oh yeah, I'm going to have this be about slavery and colonialism. That's not what's going on. In this case, I was also looking at the spectrum of grays and black and white, because that's how you can break into drawing with dealing with values. Values meaning, for anyone who's not an artist, shades of a color. And then on the right, these are pieces that are cast bronze. I have a lot of things that I got cast in bronze, and they have yet to become finished work. So I just took a picture of a pile of stuff in my studio. And I think that's, oh yeah, one more thing. Oh, so my husband, Blake Conroy, and I are getting into public art. And so this is kind of a move in my practice, which is we want to do more of it. And we worked with Brooklyn O'Malley Boys and Girls Club. And we did a lot of classes. I did a lot of art classes with the kids, 6 or 8 art classes during the summer. And then we photographed the children. And so on the right, those are the window grates that cover the windows. And those are the children who actually attended there. As a side note, Janet Waters, who's also here, and I worked with Brooklyn O'Malley back in 2000 when we were at Baltimore Clayworks. So everything in Baltimore just comes around in a, back and forth. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to skip to Michelle's question, because you showed some work with both mediums. So how do you combine the ceramic pieces with the steel? How do you decide which parts to make out of clay and which to make with steel?
So the reason I kind of one of the reasons I got into steel was I was making really thin things with clay, and I was breaking so much stuff. It was very frustrating. The other reason I got into steel was because at the time, there were a lot of sculptors making a living, I presume, I don't know, making a living, making large architectural pieces of sculpture in steel, mostly men. So I went to graduate school to learn how to weld in steel, but I missed clay because clay really responds to your hands and your whole person, I feel, can really, there's something about clay that I couldn't give up. So what happens is I will make something out of clay. If there's something that has to be really thin, that's where the metal comes in. I don't make that decision all at once. Everything kind of happens as I go along. I might decide, like with those clay pieces I just showed you, I've already decided I'm going to work with metal, but I haven't decided how.
And how do you attach the metal?
So what happened, like in that starfish piece I showed you, you have to be very careful. What I do is I take an oxyacetylene torch and I don't melt. I heat the metal, like those pink loops you saw, those are metal. I heat it up and then I wrap it around the clay that's already fired. It's been high fired to like cone 5 or cone 6. I mean, that's not high, that's medium, but cone 6 or something like that. It's been fired to its vitreous temperature. And you have to be careful because you can, with the heat, parts of the clay will pop off, and that does happen. Another way I do it is that I set up a base that's made out of metal, and then the piece will actually sit on top of it. That's not for something that's out in the public sector because that's not gonna last. And it could hurt people. Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna go back to Terry said, thank you for the comments on the grotesque. How does beauty prompt you or prompt your work?
So I have this idea about beauty, which is that like when people, what is beauty and how do you define it? And so when an artist, for instance, is so involved in this idea and it ends up looking, I don't know who would decide what's ugly, but objectively, you're looking at it, you're going, this is a mess. But what's beautiful about it is the intent and the follow through of the artist. And it's just beautiful. So that's one thing. I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, with my work, I feel like it's kind of, I think there's kind of a tension there. It's like, yes, I want it. I'm sort of teasing, and I don't want to feel like I'm teasing actually, but I'm making things that could be beautiful, that here's the pretty color, here's these flower forms. And so in a sense, they might be beautiful, but they're not, because they're also kind of dangerous, or there's this potential for danger.
Yeah. Sorrow asks, what is your favorite type of clay body to work with? That's her first. That's their first question, and then there's a follow-up question as well.
All right. So I work with a number of different clay bodies. I'm no longer working with, I used to work with a white clay body or a red clay body that was low fire it to about 05. And now there's a white kind of medium fire clay. And you might ask why I work with white, and it's just easier to start with that in terms of how I use color. But I do like red clay bodies quite a lot. I've seen there's a black clay body. I've never worked with that, and I love that. It's an exciting thing to consider.
Yes,
let's see.
go ahead. Go ahead.
There's a sculpture clay body at Clayworks Supplies in town, and it's 380. It's a sculpture body, and it has a lot of grog in it, which can make it hard to do detail work, but I like it in terms of its strength. So there's a couple of ideas there.
What advice would you give younger creative artists who are just entering the world of ceramics and their own artistic practice?
That's tough because they're paying a lot to go to college now. And I think there's more of a need to make a real living than there was when I was going to school. And so that's really tough. And I think they have to be realistic about what they want and what they're doing. So the work is the thing. Like if you have to make work and it really does feed you, then you can then it really, that making it becomes secondary in a way, because you can't control that. That's a very hard thing, that you can't control it. And luck is involved to a certain degree. And also your personality and charisma also have a lot to do with whether you can, quote unquote, make it meaning make a really good living by selling your work in some form or other, or doing public art. The other thing that happens is the funding is so unpredictable, and it's at the mercy of all the socio-political stuff that goes on too. But I would encourage people, if this is something you have to do, then do it. And, find a way of making a living that that is also gives you something too.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what that is. I mean, I knew Brent Carruthers was trained, was a sculptor, was trained as a plumber because his father was a plumber. There were a bunch of nurses, RNs, when I was back in the late 70s, when I was in college at MICA, there were a number of RNs who were there getting a second degree in art.
Yeah, so I want to mention that Christina mentioned that privilege, wait, it just popped down. Privilege is huge in making it. Yes, indeed, Christina. I do want to read a few just comments that you're getting: powerful, authentic, and sometimes disturbing work as we often need. Thank you, Nicole. And Evangeline said, thank you, Nicole, for being a shining star to your students in our community. Your kindness is appreciated.
Thank you.
I believe there, and I'm going to go back to Mark's in a second. Cheryl said your work is beautiful. And then Mark said, I think he's saying, I think there's also a lyricism in some of your work, willowy, undulating, tendrils and stems, petals, etc. What do you think?
I studied dance like my whole childhood as a child of privilege, I'll admit. And dance really helped me in terms of my shyness, and my body could move through space. And so movement is really a strong aspect. Visual movement is really a strong aspect of the work. So you were right on target with that.
Absolutely. Ebony says, you're an amazing artist in person, Nicole. Thanks for your conviction and vision. Your work is a bit like us humans. I can appreciate the juxtaposition of colors, textures, and emotions. Keep going.
Thank you so much, Ebony.
Great.
Ebony's doing some great things too.
Oh, fantastic. Do we have any final questions? You're welcome to put them in the chat if we have anything else. And if not, I have some culminating comments. Let's see. All right. Seems like I
think I'd like to mention something about privilege. And, in the US, the art scene used to be completely white. And then, but not, I'm just, let me just backtrack a little bit. The people that could get ahead, the people that could make the big living, white male was where it was at. And then people of color or African Americans would set up their own groups of artists as well. But it was kind of, it's been really difficult. I feel like things are really changing now. I think there's more opportunity for everyone. And we just have, but we have to be vigilant about it. We have to be vigilant. It's not just naturally happening.
Right. It's very conscious, intentional decisions. Yes. Lori says, thanks for being so articulate. Wonderful work in progress, personal and with people. Pat Halley says, thank you, Nicole. And Gigi says, fascinating chat, Nicole. Thank you. So I'd like to, we're going to try to wrap up. So I'd like to thank Nicole for allowing us to highlight the many facets of her career, and for each of you for participating this evening. We'd like to engage our community in helping us identify artists for the continuation of this Artist Spotlight series. Please take a moment to share your answers to these two questions. Which artist do you think is integral to the Baltimore Clayworks community, and why? And you can put them in there, and we'll sort of, and you may give us as many suggestions as you wish. You don't have to pick just one. We have so many amazing artists in our community. So Nicole, again, a pleasure as always speaking to you, learning more about you and your art. Nicole has added her email to the chat, mindartpower not the extra E though, right?
Right. Sorry.
mindartpower@gmail.com.
Sorry, take out that E.
No worries. It's been a long day. And then Elizabeth Whitner, who we did thank earlier. I hope you were on the line, Elizabeth, when we mentioned you. But she said thank you to wonderful, generous, and talented Joe Rubino. Absolutely.
Yes.
Let's see. You can help us to support projects like this, as well as the 4 programming pillars of Baltimore Clayworks, which are the education, exhibitions, residencies, and community arts, with a contribution of any size. Visit the donation page of our website, which will also now be shared in the chat. We're grateful for any and all support of the work that we do, and the continuation of Nicole's work. Christina Marsh, who has joined us this evening, is now holding the torch and continuing the amazing work in throughout the community. So we really do that. So thank you all. Thank you again, Nicole, and thank you all for your participation in this virtual event. And we hope to see you soon, online or in person. So
thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's been
Nicole.
great. And certainly feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, or you can email me.
Yes,
take care, Nicole. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming. It's great to see your faces.